Are you feeling torn between homeschooling your kids and keeping your family's income? Or maybe you're wondering how to guide your child's learning without having all the answers? If that sounds like you are definitely in the right place. Welcome to the Ultimate Homeschool Community Podcast, where homeschool dreams really meet real-world support. I'm Tiffany Hernandez, here to help you connect with the tools, community, and business strategies to homeschool confidently and keep your family's income strong. If you're ready to lead, learn, and launch, let's get started. Welcome back to the Ultimate Homeschool Community Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Hernandez. Today, we have one of our authors from our new Education Unleashed book. Welcome, Denise. Denise is the founder and CEO of Baker Creek Academy. She is also running a founder group called Trailblazed Ed, and that is for founders who are ready to scale their micro schools. So we are going to dive into this chapter today and hear a little bit about your background. So go ahead and share with us, Denise, what you've got going on.
Well, it's a lot. Right now, in my life, I'm running Baker Creek Academy, which is a confederation, basically, like a cooperative agreement between 4 micro schools, and we're in one commercial building. And then as the head of Trailblazed Ed, I have another like expanded network of micro schools. So we have a total of 10 micro schools in my network. And then I also run the Leadership Forge.
Right.
That's
That is
after having been a homeschool mom and everything else. So
right. I was like, and that's not all, because there's more. You've got all the years of
yep.
experience with your own kids. So we're going to take it back. Can you share with our audience, how you got into this movement, but also about your homeschool education with your kids? And then I'd love to share a little bit about your career that you had as well, before coming over to the micro school movement.
Sure. So I was a wildland firefighter for many years. And then as I got older and my husband and I decided we were ready to settle down and have kids. And what that meant was at the time, wildland firefighting was still very, very heavily male dominated. And there was a lot of pushback about me leaving my job to go be just a mom and take care of kids and be a wife. And I was betraying the women's movement at the time. And when I left, initially we traveled a lot. We moved a lot. We moved 9 times in 13 years. And so we decided to homeschool because it gave us consistency. And we usually lived really remotely. My husband continued with his fire career, and we would live, we drive to the end of the road, get on a jet boat to go to the house, or drive to the end of the road, take a snowcat to go to the cabin, right? So we lived really remotely. And so educating at home gave us like the flexibility. Additionally, when my husband was gone at that time, when my children were little, about 200 days a year fighting fire. And so his schedule wasn't 9 to 5, and it wasn't convenient. He was always gone in the summer. So like a traditional educational year did not meet up with our needs. And so I started homeschooling my oldest. They went to private school for a little bit for their own preschool, and then my oldest went to public kindergarten, and that was all it took to convince my husband that we were going to do something different between the
Yes.
lack of flexibility and the cultural issues we were encountering.
Mm-hmm.
So we started homeschooling in 2006, and I homeschooled all 3 of my kids all the way through high school.
So, sorry, I had to talk to my kids, but with that, being the kids were, dealing with all these cultural things and then dealing with dad being gone, what was that kind of like? Because that is really, I think, the brunt of what we face, dealing with the blame or shame from not having a career from society, and then also dealing with, okay, but the other parent isn't home, so I need to now be that stability in their life. And so how did they navigate all of that? I'd love to hear, how that all worked.
Um, my kids like took it in stride. Like I say, we moved a lot. They were used to, we always said, our family was first. And we always said, Lever team was first. And they were our primary source of inspiration. And then we rarely looked outside of our little group for any kind of support. I never lived in a state with family. once I had children, I never lived with anybody, like grandma wasn't down the block or anything like that. So it really was, my three kids and I, like when my youngest was 2, my oldest was 6, we drove from the Canadian border to the Mexican border and back, um, and homeschooled along the way. Took me, 2 dogs, 3 kids, and like 6,000 miles, and that was just life.
You know, a lot of family members do end up wanting to be with other, relatives or whatever, so that way you can have that support system, because when you don't have that support system and you're by yourself, I know for myself, like I don't know if I would be able to deal with all of that. So props to you, mom. And which that's really where you got probably a lot of your experience to be the founder, do all of the, all of the group work to help these other micro schools to thrive, because you've been there in the trenches with your own kids, which is, you've shared a lot, and you'll have to get the book to get all of those details, but we're going to talk a little bit about that, because this chapter is all about your mission. And I love the chapter because it's so true how important this mission is, not only for like our home and what we're doing within our podcast, but also for our kids and what they're doing with their life. And then it like bleeds out into society. So I'd love for you to share just a few of what you've written, and tell us some details about why, this is what you chose to write about.
Well, I see a lot of, I wanted to address the issue, a lot of micro school founders face, particularly, or people that are home educating, in that you seem to be an outlier. And I
Yes.
think that it's difficult. It's difficult to be not normal. It's difficult to do something that you feel is being judged. It's difficult to face family. Like, I had family members tell me I was ruining my kids' lives by
Oh,
them not being
yes.
in public school. And so my background in fire actually helped me to understand that a single individual can make a difference. It helped me to understand where I can contribute, like what my strengths are. And I think that the other big piece for me with microschooling, and I address a little bit of this in my chapter, is I also really feel strongly about monetizing women's contributions. And it's really important that traditionally, women were seen as equal partners, I think, in a lot of cases, and then in the modern structure, we've changed what we value, and I don't think that we give women enough credit. I was a plumber, the electrician, I was the dog groomer, I did everything, and then my husband would come home, and it was his. We had a very traditional marriage. He did all the breadwinning, and I did everything else, with him gone 200 days a year.
Yeah.
And I was still not getting much. There were a lot of people that thought I was just a stay-at-home mom, right? And
Preach
so
it.
so one of the most important things that I think, we can do now, is to bring attention to women's contributions and find a way to monetize it, which is the micro school end for me. Is like
Yeah.
helping people who are already doing this for their children monetize on their contributions.
Right. Right.
Um,
I think that's important too, because, homeschooling has always been okay. Well, so we have one income, and this is what and why I really started this podcast, was to show you absolutely can help your family's financial stability by including your children and education into that business plan, and make it work. Is it going to be 100% beautiful all the time? No. Are you going to struggle? Yes. Are there going to be some hard days when your kids are still yelling at you while you're doing a podcast? Absolutely. But like, I think we have to change that, and society is becoming more and more aware of like, okay, we're not so dead set on you have to be in the suit and the tie, and you have to be super formal, and you have to be super polished and professional. We're getting to this point where it's like, okay, we want to see the back office, which is why I really like your chapter where you're talking about being in the thick of the firefighting, and then bringing all of those experiences into the micro school movement. You know, this movement is made up of so many different backgrounds of educational ideas, which is why it's
Yes.
collecting so much attention. We are not saying that there's one size of education. We're saying meet the child where they're at, which is what you've got to change, right? Can you share one of the there was several stories, great stories about kids coming into your school and just like being at home with themselves and like growing this confidence, and that wouldn't have happened without the mission that you have and like staying true to that. Can you share some of that with the audience?
Sure. One of my favorite stories, and it's going to be hard not to cry because this kid's family is the reason I started the micro school. And actually, when I first started, I was a charter school, and we were still required to do testing. And this child struggled with his academics, and he had been retained in public school, and there was a lot of shame around that. And when he showed up in my class and knew that he was going to be required to do state testing as part of the condition of our charter, he was literally not showing up for days and then throwing up when it came time to like sit down and take a test. It was so traumatic. And we were luckily able to move away from the charter and become an independent program. And now we offer a system that is not state encumbered in any way, shape, or form. And this kid is a different kid. Like I was able to say, none of this fits your education plan. And it is not important for you to be on grade level. And it is not important for you to be able to jump through state hoops. And we were able to customize that plan, and it changed his life. It literally changed his life. He is a storyteller and he struggled with reading and writing. So we started out with voice to text, and he started telling his stories to Google, and then we'd rearrange them. And I have a picture of him as a third grader standing up with his hands over his head. He had written his first story and he says, "I feel victorious." And literally we changed his life. And he's going to be a seventh grader in my program this year, and he has big plans, and he's a
That's
happy,
awesome.
successful kid.
And that's the kind of stories that we hear about time and time again. I think, you know, even within the homeschool world, they still don't fully understand the whole micro school movement, and that it's really geared at this alternative education and even doing hybrid programming where some of it can be at home, some of it can be at a facility or online or
Mhm.
what have you. It's just a matter of doing it differently. I've seen a lot of controversy against homeschoolers versus micro schoolers. I don't know if you have anything to share about that, being now going from homeschooling to micro schooling, because the homeschoolers are like, well, why are you charging for your services? And this is education, and like education shouldn't be charged and all la 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 la, but they all buy curriculum. And I'm like, what are you doing? And so if you if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, let me start off by saying that one of the lessons I learned from firefighting is that a monoculture is not sustainable, and a monoculture is weak. So anytime when we had if you have a stand of one type of timber and a bug gets into it, it wipes out the entire stand, right? You don't want a monoculture because it's not sustainable, and
Right.
it is unable to withstand any kind of threat. You're more likely to have a stand replacing fire if everything is the same age and the same species and things like that. So I am absolutely believe in pluralism across the board. And I did go from homeschooling to microschooling, but the reason I chose to microschool is because I was doing consulting. I was doing a lot of consulting with families that were having educational crises, and they were leaving the public school and they didn't know what to do, and they didn't know anybody else in homeschooled, and they didn't want to be labeled the creepy people down the street. And it was a
Yes.
struggle. And in seeing that, I said, one of my missions, besides monetizing what we're already doing and therefore creating a recognition of our contributions, a way to measure our contributions that is aligned with the way society measures things right now,
Hmm.
is we can normalize the family leading the education, whether they choose a microschool full time because that meets their needs. I have one family who um, was reluctant to homeschool, and so they joined with my charter program at the time, and the father ended up the beginning of our second year with them in my program, he ended up being diagnosed with cancer, and the mom has 5 kids. She's 30 years old. And if her husband had not survived, she would have had a lot of trouble financially. Additionally, because they were in my program and not in public school, we were able to customize it. I would do Zoom calls with their 8th grader at 10 o'clock at night if she was stuck on a math class program and needed some help. We would run collaborative programs where they would join by Zoom while we were doing our history create projects. And so they could feel part of a community. They didn't have to go through what they were doing with their family's medical emergency alone. They were able to do it in community with people that understood where they were at, and yet it was flexible enough to meet their needs at the time.
Right.
And I think that that's what we should keep in mind is like we're all trying to serve learners. It looks differently for every situation because we're all individuals, and we should embrace that individuality and that pluralism and mind our own business.
Amen. Yeah, I can't say more about that because we have, so most of our, once we moved, because I didn't know co-ops existed when we first came into homeschooling, I knew nothing. I was totally clueless. And we came into a co-op, and it just became our lifeline. Like if we didn't have the co-ops, if we didn't have the groups, if we didn't have the community that we had, we definitely wouldn't still be homeschooling. And yes, it sometimes at times can be overwhelming because we like to do a lot and the kids are very active and I like to be out a lot. But then at the same time, I'm like, if we didn't have this group, then where would we be? Where would my kids be? I'm more of an unschooler. And I always tell people I'm like almost unschooled, not quite. We still do a little curriculum here, we still do a little lesson there,
Mhm.
but I'm like, I see learning happening all the time. And so our program is way different from your program, but it all serves a purpose. And there's a lot of space still left for people who are in the movement that want to have their own impact. Like we need more community to actually care about kids' education instead of shoving them off. That's my own personal opinion, but like instead of just sticking them in a classroom and saying, here, have a nice day. Now I'm going to go do work.
Well, and I think if you've homeschooled for any length of time, you look at your own kids and you know how individual they are. Like you might be all excited, or one of your learners might be all excited about a certain topic or subject or book, and the other one's like, yeah, don't care. Thanks very much, right? Like my oldest
Yes,
child was very academic. He enjoyed academics. He loved learning. He read at 3. He was like self-taught on everything.
that's
And
my daughter.
he had a very traditional classical education. And I started out as a homeschool mom where my kids are going to, learn Latin, and they're going to do all, they read Thucydides. And then I got to my next kid, and she was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I don't care. Not my cup of tea. And we tease her and say she quit school in 7th grade. She basically unschooled and through the end of junior high. And then and all my kids did college for high school. None of my kids did regular high school. They all started college at 14. And my next one is a trades kid. Like, I mean, all 3 of my kids have completely different educations, completely customized. They're all now adults checking boxes, and people are finally saying, okay, I didn't ruin their life. They're all productive citizens. But I think that when we start saying, like, this is homeschooling, or this is microschooling, or I think we're actually selling the people doing it short, because
Yeah.
your homeschool doesn't look like mine. Hallelujah.
Yes. Yes. Like that's a good thing. It shouldn't be frowned upon. There's a lot of purists that I've come to, with Charlotte Mason or Montessori
Mhm.
or classical education, like, classical conversations. And they're like, well, we only do this. I'm like, that's great. There's no problem with just doing one thing. If that works for you, I am so happy that works for you. We've tried everything under the sun and no one thing has worked for us, so we're doing it differently. But it shouldn't be frowned upon because we're doing it differently. It's just that we've found another way to do it.
Correct. Correct.
So
The entire point of liberating students from the system is that we can individualize.
exactly. And I know we're coming up here short. I wanted to talk about too your founder group, because I think it's really important that people understand the importance of that, because coming into this from a career, I had my own career as well. I was an interior designer. I came out of that to homeschool because I saw the need. And, you know, there's a lot to say about women in industry and not industry. Like, we all end up bickering like, oh, well, this is the right way or this is the right way. And that I'm sick of that too. But coming into this, I've had a lot of entrepreneurial background, and you as well. There is a need for this in this space. There's a lot of people that don't know a lot. They don't know what they don't know. And I we want to come off with, yes, we're professional. Yes, we're doing things orderly. Yes, 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 this is happening. And yes, it could start from grassroots and be a little bit more, fluid. But as you grow and scale, you can't do that anymore. You have to have those systems. Can you share a little bit about how you do that within your group?
Sure. So again, it does come back to the pluralism, um, monetizing women's contributions. So if someone wants to, they want to start a micro school, I will help them start a micro school, and that only is in a framework. If what I'm finding is a lot of people who really love kids and are in it, or they may have an education background, they don't necessarily all have a business background, right? They don't
Yeah.
necessarily have any leadership skills. That it's not something they've experienced. Some of them are simply moms who are in crisis, and they're brought here because they don't have another choice, and then the world opens up for them and they realize that there's opportunities they hadn't considered because they were on a different path before. So supporting that is what I think is important. Supporting these women, that whatever route they choose, whether they choose to be a homeschool mom, whether they choose to put their kid in a micro school full time because that's what their family needs right then, and it's not really my choice for that. I mean, I don't get to make those choices. I don't need to decide what you eat for dinner. You're an adult. You know your child best. You help decide what your child needs. So when we're talking about Trailblaze Ed, basically people come to me, they're ready to start a micro school, and I help them start a micro school. Or really what most of the demand is that they've already got something they love. They have their passion project. They run a homeschool co-op. They have a micro school program that they have a waiting list for and they need to grow. They run even just a network of homeschoolers. They're not a strict co-op, but they've got a need. And so we're able to then help them decide, help them really refine their vision of where they can contribute. So once you decide where you can contribute, then you have a framework for making decisions, because there's lots of things we can do, but we can't do everything all at once, and we need to choose. And so building that framework for choice and what aligns with your vision and how you're going to support your community is really what we focus on. So it's a lot of leadership and then some basic business building principles as well.
Right. And that really determines the impact, which, with a lot of nurturers and educators, our goal may be not so much success with dollars, although having monetary success definitely helps you be able to continue and be sustainable. I think the biggest impact that we care about is the lives that we're reaching, the hearts that we're touching, the future generations that are going to be changed because of being a part of something greater than even like ourselves. And I know I think you talked a little bit about legacy in your chapter, but this is really helping you to see how that legacy can keep going for generation after generation. We're not just here to do this for ourselves and our own family. We're saying, hey, we're making a movement so that the future generations also have this opportunity and it doesn't die off.
Correct. I didn't scale my micro school. I had 7 kids in my first little charter micro school, and everything was peachy keen, and I worked, probably 30, 40 hours a week. I didn't take this on, building this network and helping other people scale, simply because I didn't have anything else to do with my time. I did it because it creates sustainability. The more we normalize alternative education, the more people we get involved, the more benefit the communities that we're in see, which is also part of monetizing it and scaling it. If I'm networking with other vendors, I got that feed store down the road that we're going to be buying our 4-H projects from, or the project that we're doing in class for our science, then they see the benefit. If the building, the commercial space that I use, I've got a parent who's a midwife, and we run a birthing class out of here on the weekends as a community event, as a benefit to that community. So there's multiple ways you can scale and create impact. And that's one of the things I help people look at. It's not just about getting bigger. It's not just about making more money, but how do you scale in a way that's respectful to your vision and creating lasting impact and sustainable impacts.
Right. Which goes all the way back to the mission, which you talk about in the chapter. And there's some really great questions to dive in and really think deeply and do some soul work on what it is that like, why are you going after this? Why is that mission so aligned with what you're creating, and I love being able to connect with other founders who do see the point and the vision and the mission for going after and helping others and supporting them. But there's been so much controversy about that too. What determines a successful micro school? Well, can you really be saying anything if you don't have a successful one yourself? And it's like, we've got to stop all of this division and figure out what unites us all. What are we all after? And it's a mission. We are all after the same mission. We are here to impact future generations with education. We're here to impact the next leaders, the next founders, the next entrepreneurs. And that can't happen unless if we all see that we're on the same side.
Agreed. I always whenever I'm partnering with anyone, it's one of the things I teach in my class is that I like to look at a potential partnership through like the lens of a Venn diagram. Most of your work might be here, most of my work might be here, but there might be this one thing we can collaborate on and make each other better. And we don't have to align on all these other things.
Right.
Really, we just have to find those places where we do align and then amplify that for each other and make it and become stronger in those points. And the things I don't do well, I really want to find someone who does. It's not
Yes.
about me doing everything well. It's about finding the people that fill in my voids, hiring for my weaknesses. And when we get people comfortable with that, the growth will happen.
Right. We're not meant to do it all. And I think I've seen many founders be like, well, I have to do it all because it's just me and I can't afford to do all this other stuff or grow or, what have you. But it's until you get that mindset shift of, no, you were not meant to do everything. Everybody has their zone of genius that we need to tap into and let them do what they were blessed to do, and not only bless themselves, but let them bless you. And so when we come together, like you're saying, and collaborate, which is, we're doing a lot of that with this book. And then we can talk about the conference that we're talking about. There's a lot that has to come together where everybody really can not only connect, but thrive because of the connection.
Agreed. Agreed. That's one of the most important things I learned about being on a fire crew is that everybody has a different job. They don't hand everyone the same tool. And you have a job to do and you need to do your part so no one else is picking up your piece. But at the same time, we build a crew based on what you contribute, where you contribute. And it might not be the thing you're best at, but it's the thing the crew needs most.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I've seen that too, even in our own community, trying to come in and help with certain things that maybe I really like doing, but that's really not what they need. And so giving your community what it needs, or maybe not so much what it needs, but what it wants, which we talk a lot about in what I do, where we not only want to do what we want to do, but we want to do what the community is wanting at that moment. And we can always rope in what they need inside of what they want. And that's a really big, crucial point for Microschool founders to understand, because it's like, oh, I don't have anybody coming into my doors, or I don't have this or that, which is a lot of what Denise can help work with and all of that. But it's just, we have to start thinking about more than just what we want to offer. Yes, there is a place for everybody and what they want to offer, but it has to be something relatable to the community.
Yes. Like any other product in entrepreneurship, you need to solve a problem.
Yes.
And so you need to look at your community. And that's basically what it became. I mean, I had a dear friend come to me and said, I don't want my kid to go to school during COVID with a mask, that he already has a speech impediment and he's already suffering. And I finally said, okay, I have the bandwidth to now give to my community. And that was the impetus for me starting a micro school.
So, and we didn't even really talk about this too much, which I know you share a little bit. You started Baker Creek how long ago?
I started in 2020. um, truly as a result of like COVID had started, and this dear friend of mine came, and she had 3 kids at the time, and her 2 boys, she just did not want them to be back in public school with masking and some of the other issues because they were already having some academic struggles. And she just saw a 5-year-old boy in a mask getting in trouble all the time. And she said, that's not an experience I wanted to have with education.
Right,
And she had asked me to homeschool her kids for a couple of years, and I kind of said, you don't know what you're asking. Because and I didn't have the bandwidth to take on anything else. And then my youngest was an 8th grader at the time. And I basically said, if we blow this, it's 1 year. We can make it up later. Let's just try. So I did. So I started a micro school. And at the time, my charter required that I have 5 students from at least 2 different families that were not related to me. And so I had to jump through some hoops. And I basically had the community build it. When I needed this 5th child, because I had my son and her 3, I said to my family, this family that came to me, I said, do you need to go find me another family that's aligned with this idea and is willing to take this risk? And she did. And that's basically how we've grown since then, is that this is a service that I provide for the families, and that they have to help it. It's aligned as well.
right. Yeah, I think you made a good point there about having it be for the community, because we're not just trying to do it to make ourselves better, to get us like, I think it gets spun like, oh, well, you're just trying to make money off of blah 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 whatever. Well, isn't that every business? That's every business. Why is it so wrong for us to try and not only solve a problem that people need help with, but also actually get paid well for it? Because isn't that what everybody else is trying to do here? We've got families to feed too. So I love that you were able to do that, especially amongst the midst where businesses were closing
I
down
think
left and right.
I think that's a really important thing, that there's a lot of contention in like a traditional homeschool community about like an ESA program, which we have here in Arizona. And there's a lot of pushback on that. And I was a homeschool parent who paid for all of my kids' homeschool. I didn't, ESAs were not available until my youngest was, I think, a junior in high school. Their universal ESA program wasn't. So I did all that. I sacrificed. We didn't have vacations. We didn't have any furniture, right? We chose to educate our children. Having said that, um, there are single moms, like my family, whose father had cancer, and they ended up on, Social Security disability to buy groceries. That wasn't a choice. That wasn't laziness. There was nothing that they could have done to prevent that from happening to them. And having an ESA program made that available. Additionally, I think one of the most important things that ESA does is you can choose not to take it. It is a completely voluntary system. Additionally, it creates transparency around the cost of education. In the community that I live in, it costs as much to send a child to the local failing public school as it does to send them to a state university for a year. It costs the taxpayers over $14,000 a year. So when we're talking about, our tuition is less than half that for someone to attend full-time, curriculum provided,
Everything.
extracurriculars, field trips, everything. And so this is something that's been replicated all over the world. If you go to a war-torn community, one of the first things that will happen is an aid group will come in, a government aid group will say, we need to rebuild the schools. We need to rebuild the hospitals. And 7 years later, and the school are not finished, but there will be small pop-up private schools, and the teacher may be being paid with a chicken, but those kids are actually getting educated. And it happens all over the world. And it is finally coming to the American landscape after being dominated by the public school unions and the bureaucracy that kept people from creating a competitive system to the public system.
We're disrupting the traditional system, and I love it. Has to happen.
Yes.
Which, I mean,
Yes.
thankfully, homeschooling has become, because of I think because of the pandemic and COVID, it's become more popular and it's more mainstream, and people are finally seeing the cracks in the education system. Not that we want to like poo-poo it, because of course some people don't have the opportunity because they don't have funding in their states yet, so we understand. But I think there's a place for it all. If you want to pay for education, you don't want any strings attached, got it. If you don't mind some of the strings attached, yeah, they're not the greatest. You know, some of the ESA strings attached are kind of stringent, and that is what this conference is all about. That that's coming up in August. I can put some links down below, and maybe you can share just a tidbit of that before we get ready to go.
Sure. Yep. I'm working on with a really wonderful group of people called the Liberation of Education Conference, and it's going to be held in San Marcos, Texas, August 8th, 9th, and 10th this year. And really what we're working to do is bring together people who are offering different educational types, microschooling. We'll also have a track for homeschoolers. So if that's your flavor of education, there's going to be a complete homeschool conference involved in this as well. And then there's also a youth expo. But really the point to this was so many people don't consider alternative education until they suffer some kind of educational crisis that hits home. All of a sudden, education, I know a lot of teachers that believed in their system until their kid wasn't successful in it, right? So when we have an educational crisis, a lot of us still don't know where to turn. Even post-COVID, there's still a lot of shaming and a lot of disconnect in the different education systems. So this conference proposes that we bring together founders, parents, and students to talk about where in our Venn diagram we overlap. And it's basically in freedom and individuality. And so they'll have an opportunity to experience different kinds of education and different education perspectives at this conference.
It's going to be awesome. And we'll be putting, like I said, some information down in the show notes below. Denise, before we get going, what would you say is like one bit of advice to parents who are, considering these an option to join or start?
Well, first is like, we don't do things for ourselves, we do them for our kids, right? So I think just keep that in mind. It's scary because kids don't come with instructions, but there is a framework out there, especially now, that if you need help with homeschooling, it's there. If you need help running a microschool, there are people that can help you do that. The second, I think for me, the most important thing is trust your kid. Your kid is the expert on themselves. They really are. They know what they like. And we accept the idea that, they like purple and they would prefer chocolate cake over apple pie, but yet we're not really comfortable with them saying, I really don't care about American history. I want to learn about, the French Revolution this year. And I think trust your kid. And secondly, you're the second most important expert in their life on them, not the government.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Awesome. Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you joining today. Our book will be coming out soon. I will be putting that post as well in the link in the show notes below. And you can check out Trailblaze Ed down below as well. We'll be putting all of Denise's information so you can get connected with her. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all next time. Happy homeschooling.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me on the Ultimate Homeschool Community Podcast. Before you go, though, don't miss out. Check those show notes down below so you can get those exclusive freebies and helpful resources and some practical tips that we've been sharing to support your homeschool journey. If you found value in today's episode, which I'm sure you have, please, please, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with another parent who needs it. The more reviews and comments that we get, the more parents we can reach with the support they need. And so your next step towards confident homeschooling is literally just a click away. Just check below. So just check out those notes and we'll see you next time.